What's up, gangsters? It's time for another 10 minutes, sort of technique video. This is actually take two. I made a nice clip that actually was about 10 minutes yesterday on this subject, which is how to choose fillers for a particular situation. And then something happened when I was trying to download it onto my Mac, and I got the this disk is not readable by this computer message of death. It's never happened to me before, but after 170 some odd episodes, I actually lost everything that I had shot. So here I am, going to do it again. Now this unfortunately will be a little different because the clip I shot was, here's what I'm about to do and here's how I'm going to decide what to use. But now since I've already done it, this one is going to be, here's what I did do and why I chose what I chose. Anyway, let's check it out. Okay, so here we go. This is the situation. Actually, these are the four situations. All right, this is my Accurate Miniatures B25 Mitchell that I've been working on. And it has notorious problems with the fit of all of the nose glass. What I specifically had to deal with is that right here I had a little bit of a shoulder in this corner. Basically what I mean is that the glass was sticking out a little further than the styrene. Same thing right here, had a shoulder where the glass was sticking up proud. I also had a small gap between this piece and this top piece, right in here. Didn't run all the way around, it was only on this side of it. I had the same issue of having a shoulder over here on the starboard side, and you can kind of see where I've been working on it. I also had the issue of having a gap at the bottom of the windscreen where it meets the fuselage. And when I put pictures on SMCG, somebody said, well, isn't there any way you could make it fit right? Well, maybe, but look, it fits perfectly at the back. There's a tiny bit of a little bit of a gap there in the middle, but that's about as perfect a fit as you're going to get, and it fits good all the way around. You can also see that it's all the way down. There is no gap on the sides there where it meets the fuselage, but there was right here at the very front. I mean, the bottom line is that either the fuselage or the canopy is just not shaped quite right. And so you got to pick a way to fix it. So what are all of the options that I had while I was trying to decide how I was going to handle it? I'm going to go through each situation and tell you basically what I picked and why. All right, let me start with the gap in between the two clear pieces because that was the simplest one. I've got this great UV glue. It's a lot like what people call Bondic. This is just a different brand. And this one's nice because it comes in two different viscosities, a thin and a thick. This thin stuff is not quite as thin as like thin CA glue, but pretty close. And so it works great for wicking into a thin gap like that. It stays liquid so you can wipe off the excess before you cure it, and then it cures crystal clear. So that was a simple choice. All right. Now, with where I had the shoulder situation on both sides of the fuselage, that's what I call an area fill as opposed to a gap, because I was going to need to basically raise this entire surface a little bit in this corner, and I needed to be able to blend that out and feather it in seamlessly into the surrounding area. What I need obviously is something that's going to sand very well. So that means that I had options like, I suppose I could have used Perfect Plastic Putty, but no, because it doesn't bond at all to plastic because it's water-based. And even though it sands easily, it's kind of coarse, so the finish is not good. So because I need it to bond, I want a lacquer-based material. So the first obvious choice would be the Bondo 907, but as good as it is and as easily as it sands, it does not produce quite as smooth a finish as the lacquer-based material from Combi. Combi is a little tougher to sand, but man, it comes out smooth and nice. And so in situations where I really have to have a good finish and it's easy to get to and I don't have to, just be able to knock it down real quickly, I like it a lot. And you can see that that's what I've chosen to use in this situation. It does have a tendency, and so does 907 and Tamiya and any of these lacquer-based putties, to sometimes have little pinholes. And what I do is come back and fill those with, this is basically just some lacquer primer in a bottle that's thickened up a bit and that I don't trust for anything else. And I'll just put it on over any little defects like a little pinhole, and then it'll wet sand down real easily and real smoothly. So that was pretty straightforward for those. And part of the reason why I chose the lacquer-based material is because I knew I wasn't going to have to do any scribing or riveting, because neither of those materials scribes all that well. They have a tendency to chip. But I did come back and re-engrave the line at the edge of the glass. And I just did that with my Tamiya razor saws, and that worked pretty well. You can see where I did that. Not a problem if you're careful. But the fact that I was going to have to do some riveting is why in this case I chose to use this, which is my sprue goo, and that is just good quality sprues like Tamiya, Hasegawa, that kind of nice hard plastic that's blended with Tamiya Extra Thin and a little bit of green lacquer paint to make it easy to see. Some people worry about it being, that it takes forever to cure. No. If it does, you're using too much. This is a very thin layer, obviously, and it was fully hardened up overnight and ready to sand and polish, which it's real easy to work with a file and with sanders. It does have the disadvantage of sometimes making little bubbles, and again, I just take care of those, like I said, with the brush-on lacquer thinner. I haven't put the rivets in there yet. I'm going to do that after I put some black primer on it because it's easier to see. But I did rescribe that same line at the edge of the glass. So that took care of that part. Now, the more challenging one is the gap at the bottom of the windscreen here. And for that, my constraints were pretty hard. I didn't want to do any sanding at all because of that detail of the reinforcing rib in the middle. So that was the first constraint that automatically eliminated several of these options. And that meant that what I needed to do was use a material that would allow me to do wet removal. Obviously, I couldn't use CA glue, even though you can kind of wipe it off before it sets up if you're quick, because that might fog the clear part. So that would have been a terrible idea. Wet removal basically means, though, that you can smooth it down with a Q-tip that's dipped in whatever solvent works with the material to smooth it off, and so you don't have to sand it. Now that solvent can be water in the case of something like Perfect Plastic Putty, which, again, not perfect in this situation because it won't bond to the plastic. If I already had paint there, I might have considered it. But, this stuff is not that great. I don't even honestly know if this tube is even still any good. It had a tendency in these tubes to dry out in the tube and be useless. But they have, as I understand it, switched over to a tube like this, which is much better. Now, this is also a water-based filler, at least when it first comes out of the tube. But it's basically bathroom caulk. And it sets up pretty quickly, and once it does, you can't work it with water or anything else. So I didn't really want to take the chance because this needs to be pretty perfect. I tend to only use this where I know that I can wipe it down once and make it good enough and not have to worry about a really nice smooth union. So that left me with a couple of things. Now, Abe's Epoxy Putty, Epoxy Sculpt, is one of my favorite things because you can work it with water for a couple of hours after you use it. It's also dark gray in color, so that would have worked well here. If you have to sand it, you can. But it can be a little tough to work with, and you have to wait 4 hours for it to fully cure. So those were kind of going against it. That left me with Mr. Surfacer, either Mr. Surfacer 500 or 1000. I thought the gap was a little bit big for Mr. Surfacer 500 even, but it turned out not to be, and that is the choice that I made. Now, a couple of issues with using it though. One is that being a light color, I had to make sure and go in there and put a little black paint around the edge of the windscreen so that I wouldn't have a bright line showing. That's an important thing. The other issue that you have with Mr. Surfacer is that it actually dries slow. If you have a relatively thick application like I did for the first go-around, then you really need to let it dry overnight before you work it. But when you do decide to work it, the solvent that you need is either just alcohol or a mild lacquer thinner like Tamiya lacquer thinner, which is what I use. I just find it works easier than it does with alcohol. You will get little bubbles in it because what happens is it skins over, and as it tries to gas off, it'll make little pinholes. So you kind of have to come back and refill those. And so what I do is I use the thicker stuff first, get it worked down to where it's pretty good, then I come back and spot fill the thinner things with, or the little small divots with the thinner stuff, and just continue to work it. And this is actually the fourth application, and you can see where I've applied some to take care of some fills, and then also where it's already been worked down to a level that I'm pretty happy with. Now, it's not going to be perfect, and I hope that the guy that I'm building this for is not watching this right now and reaching for the PayPal dispute button, but this is just one of those situations where you just have to get it as good as it's going to be because, quite frankly, this is just poor kit engineering. They should have incorporated the windscreen in with this panel that's directly in front of it so you didn't have to deal with that joint, because on the Mitchell what happens is there is no canopy frame at the bottom of the windscreen. It actually just kind of disappears down into the sheet metal that's right there. So it's not going to be perfect, but I felt like this was the best way to get the best result with the least disturbance. I did end up having to do a little bit of sanding after all on the canopy because it just stuck out too far on this side. So I did end up having to file and sand and polish this side of it down a little bit to make that blend in a little bit better right there by my fingertip. But overall, I do feel like that the wet removal method was the right choice for this. So there you go. I hope you found that useful. The whole point of this was to really drive home the fact that there is rarely a single best solution for fillers. And you should have a bunch of different arrows in your quiver so that you can pick the right one. All right, guys? As always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.